Now, on this program, we've shown you many times some of the tosh produced at your expense over at the ABC Life website. It's as though the site was created to insult taxpayers or to demonstrate to critics like me that the ABC is quite willing to take tax dollars from hard-working Australians and use those same dollars for inane game playing of an unaccountable and juvenile cohort at the ABC. Crucial advice about how to break up with your partner during the coronavirus lockdown, or what the pandemic might be doing to your sex life, or how life going back to normal doesn't mean having to wear a bra. So the good news now is that the ABC Life site will be no more. As part of the new 5-year plan and current round of cost cutting, it'll change to ABC Local, and maybe, just maybe, it'll do something useful with your money. We'll see. They're also rebranding another platform we've slammed here from time to time, the Comedy Channel. Nobody was laughing at their jokes, so they decided that rather than writing funnier jokes, it was easier just to change the name of the channel. But what about the cost cutting at the ABC? They'll probably need to save something close to $80 million over 3 years and shed up to 250 jobs from 4,230 full-time equivalent positions through voluntary redundancies over about 3 years. The way they tell it, Auntie is in for some tough times.
The ABC's flagship 7:45 radio bulletin axed as budget cuts bite at the national broadcaster.
In other news, the ABC will axe up to 250 jobs and cut some programs in a major shake-up of the national broadcaster.
It's part of a 5-year plan to deal with a funding freeze imposed by the federal government.
It's the news no one in a newsroom wants to hear.
Very difficult day for a lot of people at the ABC. But it is something that has been coming for a while now.
The reaction from ABC personalities and their supporters suggests these modest budget savings will not only seriously damage the national broadcaster, but undermine the social fabric of the nation. ABC radio presenter Wendy Harmer quoted approvingly from an article in The Conversation saying that these ongoing cuts represent an attack by the federal government on the broadcaster, its role in democracy and in keeping Australians safe, informed and entertained. Not that you want to overstate your role, would you, as a comedian turned breakfast host? ABC's chief political online writer Annabelle Crabb tweeted, "It's been a dark day at the ABC, halfway through a year that began with colleagues working overtime to aid local communities through the bushfires and then doing the same under straitened circumstances during COVID-19. I've worked at News, Fairfax and the ABC, and I've never seen people work into the night, do more with less and generally give a rat's more than they do here." Really? ABC journos working beyond sunset? It's incredible. And just because commercial journalists miss out on meal allowances and overtime, it doesn't mean they don't work into the night either. The Drum host Julia Baird said on Facebook, "The relentless funding cuts are now biting into bone. This will impact on our ability to hold the powerful accountable and carve space for voices not heard, stories not told. We are all gutted." Now, at most, we're talking about a 2% efficiency drive. But former ABC presenter Quentin Dempster also saw a Conservative plot. Well, to be fair, he always sees a Conservative plot.
Doesn't make sense. It seems to all of us who support the ABC to be ideological in its motivation, and that's what's so distressing, that the government at a time of national emergency would do this sort of thing to the ABC is really appalling.
And if you've ever been annoyed at some of the relentlessly green left content produced at your expense at the ABC, it becomes doubly troubling when you see people paid with your taxes on platforms funded by your taxes, governed by rules for objectivity because they're using your tax dollars. Then they use that privilege to demand more unfettered use of your taxes.
People might say, you're just arguing for your people. I think cuts to the ABC are a bigger problem for the entire media and accountability. And when the government says, but other media is contracting, that's devastating, and that's why it matters. Journalism matters and accountability matters, and our country will be poorer without it.
I mean, yeah, where would we be if the ABC had not campaigned against the live cattle export industry or the greyhound industry or the Adani coal mine? Where would we be if the national broadcaster hadn't campaigned against strong border security or accused our Navy of torturing asylum seekers? And where would we be if the ABC's army of political analysts had not all told us Brexit would fail, Trump would lose, and Bill Shorten was a shoo-in to be Prime Minister? Where would we be if the ABC didn't tell us the coronavirus was so bad our hospitals would run out of critical care beds in April? Where would we be without all of this? In a revealing public statement, ABC Chair Ida Buttrose wrote, "These funding cuts are unsustainable if we are to provide the media services that Australians expect of us. The ABC has not only helped shape Australia, we are the national voice that unites us. It's about democracy. Without the ABC, we would have a balkanised and parochial bunch of broadcasters that are in danger of being compromised by profit and more intent on dividing than unifying." Well, I don't think we're in danger of being compromised by profit anytime soon. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, surely there is no media in this country more focused on divisive identity politics and ideological battles than the ABC. But let's put this into perspective. The ABC will still receive $3.2 billion over the next 3 years. $1.062 billion this year, $1.065 billion next year, and $1.071 billion in 2021-22.
The ABC has secure funding over the next 3-year period. We're in the first year of a 3-year funding period. So it has revenue certainty in a way that most media organisations in Australia would love to have.
OK, allowing for inflation. In real terms, this is a crib backwards, but this is a minor adjustment, the likes of which commercial media organisations could only dream about.
Now, News Corp, one of the country's biggest employers of journalists, is cutting hard too. In May, the company said, while digital subscribers are growing, advertising revenue is down more than 45%. And so the knife is falling.
I think people need to understand it's not just the ABC that has had media cuts. You look at every media organisation and those in the private sector. Ask Fairfax journalists about how many of them are left and how job secure they feel. Ask News Limited journalists. I mean, understand that the media world is changing, and as a consequence of that, a lot of jobs have gone in all sorts of media organisations.
What's missing at the ABC, of course, is perspective. It behaves like it's above the daily grind of this nation because it is. It preaches down to the mainstream because it's too often isolated from the realities of mainstream life. It's not as if there isn't enough news around to put its self-interested whinging about 250 voluntary redundancies over 3 years into perspective.
Qantas has just announced it will cut at least 6,000 jobs across all parts of the business. The airline also says 15,000 employees will continue to be stood down, particularly those associated with its international operations.
Gemma, a new direction for Woolworths, but some bad news today for employees.
Yes, so there will be 2 centres opening, but there will also be 3 centres closing across Sydney and Melbourne, and that's going to result in 1,350 jobs going.
Yeah, lots of jobs going. I dare say that being oblivious to what's going on in the outside world while demanding the government maintain your generous funding is just a little self-indulgent.
George Megalogenis had something to say on that, actually, just the other day, if I remember correctly. I think it was words to the effect of the Morrison government seems to have forgotten that the economy is in recession because no sensible government slashes public spending in a recession, especially on an essential service like the ABC. That's going to be seen as a self-indulgent comment by me.
Yes, Virginia, you're right. It will be seen as a self-indulgent comment. Here's an idea. The ABC loves to push tax increases. It was at it again with a GST push last night.
What about just lifting it then? Australia's rate of 10% is well below the OECD average of 19%. Work from ANU says if we put the rate up to 15% and put it on everything, it would raise another $90 billion in extra revenue.
Using about a third of the revenue.
There you go. Just tap the taxpayers for some more money, hey? They do love higher taxes, volunteering all of us to surrender more of our money. So why not fix the ABC's woes without any change? Just an across-the-board wage cut, say 3%. That'll do it. All the staff can carry the load. I mean, after all, it is their ABC. Let's go back to Gemma, Tim and James. James, that'll do it, won't it?
Oh,
pay
well,
cut,
look,
carry on.
Don't know what more I could add to that, but, I do love, of course, that the ABC has a 5-year plan. That's keeping in the good sort of ABC Soviet tradition there. But the thing that really struck me about that whole thing, beyond the self-indulgence of Patricia Karvelas or anything else, it was what Ida Buttrose was saying there about how without the ABC to give us a national unified voice, that would be a threat to democracy. And then we'd have a balkanized media where everybody was saying different things. So her definition of democracy is actually one where everybody is given a line by the state broadcaster and then follows it. I just don't know how that works, Chris.
It was an incredible statement from her, and Tim, you focused on this in your column today, and I thought your column was brilliant because you couldn't believe that someone who's spent most of their life in the commercial media like Ida has, and I'm a great admirer of hers, up until she got this job, I think. But you made the brilliant point that it sounded like she was actually a hostage. It sounds like she was reading this stuff out at gunpoint.
Absolutely. She needed a jumpsuit and some dudes behind her in black clothes, and she's got the part. But just a couple of things here, just expanding on what James is saying about the democracy nonsense. If only the ABC was about democracy, because then we could vote it out.
Yeah,
that'd be good.
Exactly.
That'd be cool. Yeah, and the whole hyperbole, or as hyperbole, as Julia would say, over the ABC's role in protecting us from everything and unifying us. I live in an area north of Sydney that during the bushfires, we weren't just getting ash landing on our house, we were getting burned leaves. So we were quite invested in following the bushfire. And it was a large one, quite a ways behind our property, but we were told at one point, it's not a matter of if, it's when. So we were following it every day. I never listened to a single ABC broadcast, never watched a moment of ABC TV. We didn't need to. Daily Telegraph online, normal TV channels, Sky.
Commercial radio,
covered it all. It was terrific. And local radio and Twitter, local people here. The ABC is surplus. And by the way, here's a question to ask next time you've got Quentin on the show. Because I've never heard this from an ABC person. If they think the budget is too low, what is their idea of an acceptable yearly budget?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And one of the points I made in my column today, Gemma, was, they cry poor all the time, but for an interview series this year, they brought back Barry Cassidy, who retired last year. So instead of asking any of the hundreds of journos there to do an interview, they paid an outsider to come back and do interviews. They do this sort of stuff all the time.
Well, that's not just about financial management, that's about career progression for journalists within the organisation who would no doubt jump at the opportunity to step up and do that kind of interview series. I mean, that's just growing your own people. Look, my first job, Chris, as a journalist back in the day was with the ABC in the Karratha Bureau. The first story I ever got paid to write was about a thing called the Pannawonica Dunny Derby. I challenge you to go Google it. It was not exactly lofty beginnings, but my point is I'm not fundamentally against the ABC, but what I am fundamentally against is inefficiency. And as a friend of mine who's a long-term public servant here in WA said recently, it doesn't hurt every public sector organisation to have its feathers ruffled about efficiency from time to time. They're not a protected species. And this is a time where every government organisation, in fact, you know what? Every government organisation should be obliged to be efficient because it's my money that they run on and your money. They work for us. They don't work for anyone else. They work for the taxpayers. And to your point, Chris, about an across-the-board wage slice so that everybody keeps their jobs. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure the twatters will, but it was NPR in the United States who put out a tweet about 4 or 5 weeks ago saying that that's exactly what they decided to do collegiately, all except a combination of pay cuts and extended leave and furloughs and that sort of stuff so that nobody would lose their job.
You'd expect that
you know
from
what?
the public
sector. The standard's
sector.
been set.
It has
you
indeed.
Would.